Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining here at NDC. Come on in. Come on. This is now room 2, if you haven't noticed. I hope we'd figure that out. I thought this was room 1 earlier. It's room 2, but the big 2 on the podium, I think, should help us out there. Cool. Morning, everyone. My name is Nash. I am a developer evangelist at a company called Twilio. Twilio, if you haven't heard of it, is a platform for communications. So that means a whole bunch of APIs that you can use in your applications to do everything from sending and receiving text messages or emails to making phone calls, creating video chats, sending two-factor authentication and doing verifications like that. If there's a way you can think of communicating with somebody online via your applications, then we probably have an API that can help you out with that. Now, I'm not here to talk about Twilio, at least in this session. Although it does feature as part of our verification flow in this. I'm not going to talk about it. But if you do ever want to ask me anything about it, you can find me online. You can find me at Phil Nash on Twitter. You can drop me an email, philnash@twilio.com, or we're right here in the venue. Come find me. There is a Twilio stand just out there, so come say hi there. I have some stuff to give away. I won't ask you to sign up for anything. Just come get stuff. But yeah, we're not here to talk about Twilio necessarily. I'm just here to talk about better authentication experiences. And in fact, the title of the session kind of said better two-factor authentication experiences. But this is NDC. We've got hour-long talks, and two-factor authentication as part of that is just a small slice. So I'm extending it to the entire authentication experience because I think. Almost every application that we build has some kind of login authentication experience as part of it. That makes sense. We tend to want to authenticate people before they can do anything too interesting. And so there's not too many applications out there that don't have a login. But I don't think we've done an awful lot of innovating on that login or authentication experience since the first person put a username and password field on a form and shipped it to production. And that's fine, it's a relatively simple thing. It's not a thing that you have to deal with all that often. And indeed, as developers, as people who use and work with our machines every day and kind of know the shortcuts and the ins and outs of how everything works, we're actually pretty good at logging into things, I reckon. Like if I go to my demo application right here, all it does is log people in. But what I can do is log in and, I'm already straight into my password manager. Bang, I've got a password, I'm done. I already know there's going to be two-factor authentication, so I've picked up the phone ready to enter a code as soon as it arrives. There it is. The code is 601 686. Bang, and I'm logged in. That's fine. That's great. That's my experience. But that's unlikely to be every other user of your application's experience. There was a survey done by Google at the end of 2018, so it's a little while ago. Maybe the data's a little out of date, but I couldn't find anything better. That said that 24% of people use a password manager. 24% of respondents to the survey use a password manager. Now, the survey was by Google, so I assume that included in this is kind of using the password manager built into the browser as opposed to necessarily installing and using a password manager like 1Password or Bitwarden, which is what I use. 24% is actually not bad. It's higher than I thought it would be. But it still means a good 3/4 of people are out there not using a password manager. And so they're not like instantly filling in their username and passwords. They're typing that in. And that's a bit of a shame for them, I suppose. And so we can do better. Like the people having login experiences are not having the same that we are as sort of power users of our machines. In fact, the flowchart looks a little bit more like this, right? You get to a login screen, you see a username and password, and that's probably a little small. So I'll tell you at the top, it says, do I know my username? Which, of course, is a great question. If you don't use the application that often, what even was your username when you signed up? I like to think I've got Phil Nash at everything, or probably it's my Gmail account, my personal email, but then there's things I've logged into my work email account. Even I don't necessarily know what the actual login username is. And so if you don't, you're off to a painful start where you're off to remind me what my username flow is. Second is, what's my password? Again, with a password manager, no problem whatsoever. But for that 3/4 of people who don't have their passwords necessarily ready to hand, they're asking, do I know what my password is? Possibly not. Straight off to a password reset flow. Password reset flow, which has to remind you which email you were using for this, which is not the same question as what the username was, but maybe the same question. Very confusing. If you think you know both your username and password, you enter it, and then you find out if you knew what your username and password was, and you either head back around to the start again because you were wrong, or and then maybe go off and do one of the reset flows, or you get through that, and then a modern application will bring you onto a two-factor authentication challenge to make sure you're really the person that you say you were. And all of that is a bad experience so far. And then you've got the two-factor authentication challenge, right? You have to be like, oh, where's my phone? I knew that was coming up when I was doing it. I had my phone unlocked and ready to answer the challenge. But your regular user probably has tossed their phone in another room and has to go find it or whatever. And this is an awkward thing. Or maybe they're on their phone. You've got to open the SMS application. You got to try and copy the number out of and iOS particularly doesn't like you copying things out of a text message. Obviously all you want is the entire text or none of the text when you copy. So that's a pain. So you could do that, or you can remember the 6 digits. And 6 digits is not too bad to remember, but it's a bad experience. It's a bad experience all round. That is my rating of the experience. It's a bad experience. It's not necessarily that it's poop, but it is an awful lot of friction. The things that people can do with our applications, with our web applications online, are useful once they've logged in. And we put an awful lot of friction in the way of that in order to protect their accounts, protect their security, protect our applications, but ultimately possibly just put them off and give up on it. Or at least start the experience in a frustrated way. Like I said, it's not the case for power users, and that's fine, but we need to appeal to everybody who's possibly using this kind of stuff. So how do we reduce this friction? Well, thankfully, that's what we're here for today. There are APIs available to us in the browser that are going to make this easier. And by the end of the thing, even my login experience, which I just showed you there with the password manager and with already knowing I had to copy a code across, that's going to get quicker and easier, all the way down to just 2 clicks in the best scenario. And hopefully that'll excite you to improve your authentication experiences back in your applications too. So we'll start with the username and password. We'll start with that side of it, and later in the talk we'll hit the two-factor authentication side of it as well, in order to, like I said, 1 click for username and password, 1 click for two-factor authentication. We'll have people logged in no time whatsoever. So how can we make this username and password flow better? Well, I'm going to start with HTML. HTML, funnily enough, gives us a surprising amount of stuff that helps us along the way already, and just makes that flow a little bit easier. It gets better with this, but the HTML attributes on our input elements are the most magical things. I think the HTML input element is the most incredible, incredible element that we have. It has so many attributes, and its entire behavior can change on a single attribute, right? We can go from text to email to a checkbox to a radio button with an input element, and it does an awful lot. Now, this is sort of, this is a basic login form. We have 2 inputs, a button to log in, and this is not a bad start, right? This is accessible. The label elements here have a 4, which matches up to the ID of the field. So if you click on the label element, it highlights the input field. That's good. That's a good start. It's adjusting those things together. But there's a couple of things we can change here. It's going to make life better for us. First up, my username. In this case, we saw the application there has an email as a username. So our type of text is not great. It's fine if you're on desktop, but actually we want to see the experience kind of. We'll come back to that. We want to see the experience on mobile as well, and so I have my Android device here hooked up to the same application. If I go to log in here, and I go and hit that username field, which again, we know is an email address. This is the text keyboard. It comes up, but we want an email address, and we have to find the @ there it is. Okay, it's over there on the far left on the second keyboard. Not the best experience. And secondly, we can also give more hints to our browser and actually to any other assistive software that will help us with usernames or passwords by including the autocomplete attribute. Autocomplete's wonderful. I'm going to start with that one. And it tells the browser if you already know a thing for the username and for the current password of this application, we can offer that as an autocomplete. Nice and easy. all we have to do is add a couple of attributes, and we're done. I will note we have a current password there, not just autocomplete password, because there's two situations for a password. We can have a new one or a current one. And new and current are very good differentiators when you are, for example, changing your password in a different flow in the site, where you have to enter your existing password and the new one probably twice. And so if you mark those up with autocomplete new and current, then the browser or anything trying to fill in those, autocomplete those things, can autocomplete with the existing password and offer to generate a new password if you like. For some reason, I know that the slide for this is somewhere later in the pack, and therefore I just have to tell you about it now. I don't know why I did that. Firefox, for example, with a new password autocomplete will actually offer you to generate a random password for you. Other browsers might do so. Firefox is my regular day-to-day browser, so I happen to know that if I hit a form with password is new password, autocomplete new password, it's going to offer me one. That causes me frustration at times, because I think it's when if you use Zoom and you ever watch a Zoom recording that has a password on it, for some reason they've put that as a new password with the autocomplete, and so you're like, I know I've been given the passcode to see this video, and Firefox is like, do you want a new one? You're like, no, I've got it's in my emails, I got the old one. Anyway, let's add these things, I think, to the demo. I've got the code for this application right here, and so I'm just going to start by adding auto-capitalize. See, the input field is the input element is full of so much stuff. Auto-capitalize is the thing we could use as well. I'm not going to for now, but autocomplete, we're going to put in username. Now, it's interesting. Email is another thing you can use as autocomplete, but in this particular case, we want to specifically indicate that this is the username. Even if the username is an email, it is a username for the site. And username autocompletes get tied to a site, whereas an email autocomplete can just be part of any other kind of settings that you have stored in the browser, email address, even credit card details, if you trust the browser with them. But the username specifically ties it to this site and this login. So that's a useful thing. I'm just going to change that type there to email. The input type to email. And then I'm going to add the autocomplete is current password, because that's the right one. I'm just going to go back to that and show there is a bunch of stuff we can do in autocomplete. Autocomplete should be used everywhere you have forms. It's going to stop people having to fill things in. It does all the address stuff, does your birthday, billing, credit card, family name, your fax number. Very important. All sorts of stuff. There's a big argument I read online yesterday on GitHub about whether username and nickname are the same thing. They're not. Nickname is what your friends at school call you. Username is what you need to log in. So anyway, autocomplete, really useful, and it's going to make life better. So we actually, if I go back to, the mobile version of this and refresh the page, I'm not going to see a lot, I think, from autocomplete right now because I haven't logged into the thing yet, but I will start by saying that now we have the @ symbol on the keyboard, and that makes me happier because it's already easier to enter my email address. And if I do go and enter my email and password, remember what the password is? The password's secret. It's not a real database, it's not a real app, it doesn't matter. It just shows you. Anyway, I've got my two-factor authentication. It's offering to save those details, and the browser is pretty good at working this kind of thing out, but if you include those autocomplete attributes, then letting it, did I turn it sideways? And there we go. It's offering to save it, and that gives us more, the autocomplete gives the browser more confidence that it should be able to do that. Let me just paste that in, and I'm fully logged in. Still took me a little while. We'll get there with that. Let's log out again. So that's just the HTML. A couple of simple things you can add to any form that's going to make life easier for your users if they are into auto-completing things. Good start. But that's not really turning this into a one-click experience. We can do better than that. And that brings us to the Credential Management API. Now you see, browsers for a long time have offered to save your username and password for sites as you go in. That's what I think. That's what a lot of people, I imagine, believe are a password manager, and it is, especially if you use Chrome everywhere, because it syncs between your account. But did you know that we can actually control this API or control storing and retrieving of credentials from the browser's password manager with the Credential Management API? Not many people do. It turns out, I was trying to look up some statistics on this, and the HTTP archive crawls enormous amounts of websites and has all the data on everything that they do, their performance, the APIs they use, all sorts of things like that. And the Web Almanac, which is a great kind of distillation of all that data, comes out kind of yearly. The most recent one was last year, still 2021. But in 2020, they reported that of all the sites used in the HTTP archive that were looked at via the Web Almanac, 0.008% of sites use the Credential Management API. So it's not popular. I had a hunch that this was not a popular API, and I was instantly proved correct by 2020's Web Almanac. The 2021 one didn't even mention it. They were like, this is a lost cause, it's gone. So here in 2022, I'm trying to revive that and bring it back again. The Credential Management API is really cool because it is going to provide us that one-click login experience for people with username and password. So the Credential Management API allows us to store and retrieve credentials, those usernames and passwords. It's actually available to store the idea that you have a federated login as well, like an OAuth, OpenID kind of login as well. I'm not going to go into that right now. We're just covering username and passwords. But know that even if you have your login page with a username, a password, and then a bunch of social buttons to log in with Facebook, log in with Twitter, whatever, the Credential Management API can handle that too and make life easy for you. But we're able to store and retrieve credentials. And it's actually relatively simple. There's not a lot of code to do with this. So this is kind of like when we submit a form and have a successful login, we can run this code. First up, it's important, line 1, to check whether this actually exists. And the best way to do that is actually to check if the password credential object is there available on the window object. You see later down here, we use navigator.credentials. So this Credential Management API actually forms the basis of WebAuthn, the Web Authentication API, which allows us to do sort of passwordless logins, which is great, and actually slightly better supported than the password credentials because it is supported in all browsers. So if you look for the existence of navigator.credentials, you'll find browsers that support WebAuthn, but not necessarily browsers that support password credential, which is what we need here. The browsers that do support password credential are Chrome and Chromium-based browsers, which on my last look at caniuse.com was about 72% of all people. So this is worthwhile using because it's going to work for most people. So if we have the password credential in the window, then we take that user ID and the password. The user ID in this case is that email address that's coming from my login form. The password is the password. And we just ask, we create a credential, and then we ask the Navigator Credentials API to store it. This is actually going to pop up that Chrome would like to save your password thing to the user. So this is a user opt-in API, and it's the kind of opt-in API that they're used to seeing, but because they're accepting it and we asked for it, we now sort of have a bit of control over it, which is kind of nice. And so navigator credentials.store, that will resolve if the user says yes. I don't actually think it rejects, because I don't think, if you cancel, like that gives you more information about the user as well. So basically, you ask it to store it, and as long as everything goes all right, we can move the user on. And in this case, I'm just redirecting to the next logged in URL or my two-factor authentication URL. And then when you get to a login page or a page that has login on, you need to retrieve those credentials. So if you've stored them via this method, if you've stored them by asking to store them, and the user saying yes, then you can call a navigator credentials get. You need to pass password true to this to say I would like a password credential back. If you have stored federated credentials, then you need to pass federated credentials and a list of the places you expect to get those back from. But we're going to keep it simple for username and password. So pass password true, and if the user has stored one password and username and password pair with you, then you'll get that back. Yes, you get that back immediately. And then you can go and log in with them, submit them to a form, move the page on. That can, if you set it up like this, that can actually happen silently. You can do that sort of in the background, and the browser will notify the user, but it's just going to happen silently. You can change that to unmediated, unmediated doesn't take true. It takes silent, required, or optional as an argument, and we'll see that in the actual code when I get to it. Silent says, cool, we'll take this as if we can have the password, then we'll just take it and log the person in silently. Required says, I need to pop up a thing to the user to say, hey, do you want to log in with this account? And optional is based on the user's preferences. But this sounds like maybe a bad thing. When you log somebody out, it's a good idea to call on prevent silent access. So if a person is specifically logged out, that you don't want to automatically log them back in the next time they come. So calling prevent silent access will make sure that there is a mediated user intention based on that thing. I'm going to show this as a demo. I'm going to write this into the code right now. So I have blocked off my comment to check for access because I know it's going to be there in the browser I'm using, and that's just easier. So first up, I'm going to ask to store the credentials. So in this particular a little bit of JavaScript here, I've just grabbed the form off the page. What I really like about grabbing a form off the page is that you can pass it straight to a form data object, and that's going to set up all the attributes for a form data object. What I think is slightly weird is how if you have a fetch with a form data object, it makes it a multi-part request, even if you only have text in there. And so in this particular case, I'm turning it into a search params object as well, which eventually gets sent to my login action. And if we get a successful response, that is where I'm going to say, OK, cool, let's store those credentials. We know they worked, and we can store the credentials. So we're going to call it, no, we need to make a new password. So we're going to make const creds equals a new password credential. Using the form, again, this object will also parse the form for the expected details. And this is another reason to include those autocomplete attributes, because they are also signifying to these to form data and to password credential what they actually mean in terms of what the browser understands a username and password to be. And then once we've done that, we are going to call a navigator.credentials.store using those creds. We're going to await that. That is a promise-based thing, and that is going to pop up that expectation from the browser to say, hey, to the user, do you want to store these credentials? If it doesn't work, I'll just log an error, but it should do. And once that's all done, it's going to redirect to whatever the application sent back as a redirect URL. Cool. Whilst I'm here, I'm going to do the get credentials from store side of it as well, so we can see this happening on both sides. In this particular case, this is just like the login page is loaded. We can ask immediately. We know the intention here is to log in. We can ask for those credentials, and if we get them, pump them straight into the login form and move the user on. Again, it's going to be await navigator.credentials.get. And like I said, here we ask for password to be true. And of course, that is going to be some existing credentials. Equals await there. Password is true. And then if I get some existing credentials, so that promise resolves with either null if there are no existing credentials, or if the user says, no, I don't want to log in with that account. We'll get a null. If we get existing credentials, we get that password credential object back, and I just have a little login with existing credentials method there, function there, which is just hiding the form and setting the values in the form to the ID and password in that credentials object. So if I refresh that, I'm going to go back to the browser here on my phone, because this is the best way to show it, I think. It does work on the desktop as well, but I think the phone kind of shows this as a nice thing already around. So I'm going to enter my username and my password, which again is so good it's secret. When I log in, this time it's going to ask me to store this password, store these credentials again. This is my application going, that worked. No, it moved on. It come back. That's a bit unfair. And then I'm going to just get the password in. OK. For some reason, my phone has started doing that, so I'm going to go and do this in the browser over here instead. And like I said, what's nice about Chrome is it's actually already syncing those passwords back and forth across. So this time, if I log in with my philnash@twilio.com account and the password, we get the pop-up. Here we go. I can save it there. And then I get a two-factor thing, which I'm going to need to answer, because otherwise I rate limit myself with the API there. Oh, I'm trying. And I'm logged in. Yeah, cool. So let's take it back to the device. And like I said, excitingly, this should have already synced across. And now when I go to log in, it should actually offer me, whoa, in fact, you see at the bottom, signing in as philnash@twilio.com. And that was the silent version, right? We got hold of those credentials, and I'm immediately logged in. Cool. No, two-factor authentication again, obviously. So that was silent. It told us what was happening. It told you at the bottom that you were logging in as that account, and that was cool. So I'm signed in there. Now I'm just going to change that so it's not mediated. Oh, mediated? Yeah, there we go. Mediation. So, there we go. I copied an old API. It used to be called unmediated and true or false, and they changed it to tell you what the mediation should be. And so I'm not a huge fan of necessarily silent authentication. You definitely want to give a user an option, I think, to not log in as that person. And so mediation is required is going to change that back to, in this case, not immediately saying it, but popping up a thing to say, hey, do you want to log in as this account? And then I can press sign in, and that's going to take over and do the rest of it. Beautiful. If you have more than one account, if you decline that the first time and then log in with a different account that then it asks you to save and you have two accounts, you then get an account picker to say you've got your work and your home account, which of these would you like to log in as? And once that is selected by the user, your Navigator credentials get API, which is still on the screen there, will resolve with that single credential. Calling on navigator.credentials.get does not return a list of credentials and gives you an option as the application to do so. It gives the user the option to choose the account that they're logging in as. So that is mediation required. And like I said, optional is based on user options, which you can set in your passwords. So there's an auto sign-in option there. And that's the answer to optional. If that's checked, then you're happy for the browser to auto sign you in like this. If that is unchecked, then the browser will always pop that little thing up and to say, hey, is this the thing you're logging in as? Cool. So that is like one step, one click, once you've logged in for the first time, and you can obviously do this at registration, not just at a login field. We can now have a one-click sign-in experience for users of Chromium-based browsers, more than 70% of the internet. I think that's pretty cool. So that's one side of it, but I've been awkwardly offended every time that I've got past that stage to go to the two-factor authentication flow as well. And so I just want to dig a little bit into two-factor authentication, why we're doing it, why we're still doing it on SMS, and then show a way to get through that a lot quicker as well. So again, two-factor authentication is friction. We introduced two-factor authentication for security reasons, not for user experience reasons. Although in some cases, security is user experience because people want to be more secure. But it's still an extra step on the way to getting to the job that a user ever wants to do when they're logging into your application. And we want to reduce that friction so they can get on with what they wanted to do. Now, two-factor authentication exists for pretty much this reason. This was, again, from that Google poll in 2018, in which I've got some labels on this. They asked, how often do you reuse passwords? And the big blue slice here is 52% of people saying some of the time. Some of the time, people reuse passwords. That's all right. I mean, the yellow slice here, which is like 11% of people, 13% of people, said they reuse passwords all of the time. There they are. They're one-password people. Not the application, because they have one password, and they continually put that into every single account that they use. We can't really stop them doing that, but that's what they're doing. And I think this is sort of brave and honest of people to say, yes, security is not important to me. I will reuse my password every time. And then there's 35% of people said they never reuse passwords, which I think is really cool. 35% of people saying different passwords for every application. But I'll remind you that 24% of people in this survey said they use a password manager. So that's 11% out of that 35 who either have incredible memories or they're lying. They are reusing passwords even though they don't realize it. Or I guess maybe they just have a big piece of paper next to their desk that they're writing the passwords on. They don't consider that to be a password manager. I do consider a piece of paper next to your computer a password manager if it's in your own home. Not if it's on your desk at work, that's awkward. But if it's at home and somebody has breached your password manager because it's a piece of paper on your home desk, you have bigger problems because they're in your home. So a home password book, perfectly reasonable. Buy one for your parents, they'll love it. And then, so one of the ways we try, I think, to get away around this people reusing passwords all the time is to create more interesting variants on how to get people to input a password. This is my favorite tweet about this, back from 2014. This tweet is it's old enough to go to school. Your password must contain at least 8 letters, a capital, a plot, a protagonist, and good character development with a twist and a happy ending. It's honestly my favorite. And if passwords could be like that, it'd be a lot more interesting to read them. Sadly, they'd all get hashed, obviously, but that's what we get. We impose difficult password requirements on people to try and encourage them to build longer and more difficult to guess passwords, but it also makes them more difficult to remember, which is why we end up with people using the same password every time. And that password is, of course, password 1 with a capital P and an exclamation point at the end, because this fulfills every single password requirement you've ever wanted. It's a good solid 10 characters long. It's got a special character. It's got a number. It's got a capital letter and lowercase letters. And oh my goodness, it is the worst password you could ever choose, but it will pass every single test. That is, unless you're testing for passwords that have already been breached, which is a great thing to do. And so this is NDC, obligatory Troy Hunt mention. If you've probably been to haveibeenpwned.com and checked out your own accounts, but you can actually use one of the APIs in Have I Been Pwned is the Pwned Passwords API, which allows you to check for existing passwords that have been in a breach some other time. You can check on that and then tell your user that you can no longer use password 1 because it's been seen 3 million times or something. I'm interested. I kind of want to know what that is. I can work this out because I have a command line tool which checks passwords. What was it? Capital P, password 1 exclamation point has been used. Okay, 7,404 times publicly. That's better. You know, it's better than just password 1, which is presumably 220,000 times, and just password with a capital P 433,000 times, and then finally, just to really rub it in, password 9,545,824 times. Right? These are bad passwords, but that first one, 7,000 breaches, is still a perfectly reasonable password for your requirements. So using the Pwned Passwords API for that kind of thing is great. But really, the answer to saving people who reuse the same password all over and over again, even if it's a supposedly secure one, becomes two-factor authentication. We add a second factor onto the thing, and this almost becomes the same as that password being at home. Like if somebody has already breached your device, you have bigger problems. And so owning another device or another factor in order to log in is the answer. And it turns out the most popular way to do that is via SMS. SMS is not necessarily the most secure channel. It has some issues within it that stem from the 80s when the entire SMS network was kind of being built. But it is better than a password and a username on its own. And that's the important thing here. And so for most use cases, SMS is a good way to reach as many people as possible to make their accounts more secure. Now, if you happen to work in a bank or something, then targeted attacks on people with SMS is kind of where the thing falls down. But for a general use case and for a general population, SMS is good and it's not going away. And almost everybody these days has a phone in their pocket that can receive an SMS. They don't necessarily have a phone in their pocket that can actually use an authenticator app. And they certainly don't all have YubiKeys, that would be great, right? But not the case. But it's not a good experience. I said this already. I already knew I had to pick the phone up when I was logging in right at the start. But that gets me every once in a while. When I'm on my desktop machine and I go to log into something and it asks for two-factor authentication, asks for a code, I tend to end up picking up my phone and forgetting what I was going to do, and then checking out Twitter, which is apparently going off right now anyway. And then about 20 minutes later, I kind of look up and go, oh yeah, okay, cool. And fill that number in. If it was an SMS one, it's probably run out of its 10-minute limit at that point. If I'm using the app, then it's just rotated around the same different numbers every 30 seconds until I finally fill it in. But it's not a good experience. I just put myself off, and it's almost embarrassing. Not so embarrassing I won't tell a whole room of people, but I'm trying to get beyond this. So again, we're going to make this better. And we're going to turn this into a much fewer clicks experience so that it makes it a lot easier for people. And again, we start with the HTML. And we get our autocomplete attribute comes and saves the day again. This one's brilliant. If we have an input on a page like this, and we had autocomplete equals one-time code, then Safari on iOS and indeed on the desktop knows that it can use that to autocomplete text messages that come in that look like they have a code that goes into a one-time code field. It's all a lot of heuristics and things like that, but it's pretty good. And the entire reason I started wanting to give this talk was when I was logging into a thing on my phone and realized that the code was arriving in the autocomplete section of the keyboard. I'm like, this is brilliant. Why can't we have this everywhere? How does it work? This is how it looks. You log in, and then we get to the next page. The text message comes in, and just, it's so quick. When I was recording these, I didn't think about how quick they'd be. But you can see right in the middle there, at the top of autocomplete, it says from messages, and it's got that 6-digit code. So if you don't have an iOS device, that's what it looks like. It just arrives in your autocomplete keyboard, you press it, and that actually auto-submits the form as well. It knows that's all you need to put into it, submits the form, moves you on. Oops. Submits the form, moves you on. Let's hit the thing. I don't have to touch anything else, and it is moving itself on, and you're logged in. So one attribute makes life a lot better for iOS users. There's more we can do for this to make life better in terms of attributes for our mobile users at least. This is, again, the keyboard that comes up when you get to one-time code. And if you are having to copy this across from somewhere else or remember it, or you're on an Android device and we've only added autocomplete is one-time code so far, then we're going to see this keyboard, which is the text keyboard, and we want to enter a number. That's kind of annoying. And so adding and updating the input mode to numeric is another simple little change that is going to give us the numeric keyboard. Notably, this is still a text field, not a number field, because that gives you a different keyboard entirely. And one-time codes are text. They might start with 0, and we don't want a browser to decide a number should never start with 0. So it's a text field, but if we put the input type numeric, then we get a number keypad, and we get that on the Android device as well. And the kind of exciting thing is, if you've bought entirely into Apple stuff, if you're an iOS user with Safari on your phone, and you're a macOS user with Safari on your desktop, and you use all of that, then this works on the desktop as well. It kind of all fits together, and when you log in, the text message comes through, and it appears as an autofill even on the desktop, which I think is very cool. Also, I'm bad at CSS, which is why that button comes up red and blue at the end. But I genuinely think that this is a bit of a magical experience. Just by adding one attribute to our form, if the user has set everything up so that messages arrive on their macOS device, they get that autofill, and they don't have to worry about picking their phone up and dealing with it. It's a good experience. But it doesn't count for the other side of things. It doesn't count for our Chrome and our Android users. And so for that, they actually introduced a new JavaScript API. Now, I'd kind of like to see this just be an HTML attribute, kind of add this to a form and you're done thing. But I think there was perhaps more security concerns, perhaps the idea that maybe this is something that shouldn't just be built into the operating system, and that really it should be something that any browser with any operating system should be able to interface between in order to make this happen. And so the WebOTP API was born out of this. And whilst it has its own name, WebOTP, it's actually built on the existing credential management system that we've already seen. We don't need to use password credentials or federated credentials, as the first part of the talk talked about, but we still get to use that Navigator credentials get method. It does start with one extra little security thing. That's maybe a bit small, but up there, when you send your code, which says your verification code is this number, you also have to follow it up with this last line here, which starts with an @ symbol, then is the domain name on which you are hosting this site, then a space, a hash, and then the login code. And that is to avoid phishing. It avoids using this API to autofill codes on a site that you're not expecting to log into. And so if you use that, and this format was actually created and sort of standardized by Android and iOS for their various sort of SMS receiver APIs that they had. And at one point, this API was going down the same route as the Android's SMS receiver API, but it stepped back, used the credential management thing instead, but still used this format of text message to imply that this code only works for this domain and keep people safe that way. So I like that. And then this is it. The OTP credential is the credential management API system. And if that exists in the window, then we can use Navigator credentials get. And in that object, we pass in not password, as we did earlier, not federated, as we did earlier, but we pass in OTP, and then an object in there, including transport, and an array, and that array can only have one item in it, and that item is SMS. Now, it seems maybe ridiculous to have an array that can only have one item in it, but that implies extensibility, and we'll come back to that later. And what happens is, well, I don't need to show you that. In fact, this video is not very good at showing it, because again, it moves by too quickly. But I can show you that by adding this to our application right now and demonstrating it on the Android device. And we can see the entire login flow and how it works nicely. So I have a bunch of stuff here, which is just collecting some things from the document. And I'm going to wait for the OTP code right here. So we're going to go, we're going to await Navigator credentials.get. And like I said, this is asking for OTP. And there's only one thing we can put in here, and that's transport. And there's only one thing we can put in this array, and that's SMS. So we're asking for the SMS code over the OTP transport. And when we get that, we can use it. So that's an await. I probably should try around there just to be safe. Let's do a little catch here as well. Oops. Who'd have thought typing catch would be the hard part of this? Cool, so we get that transport, we get the OTP object, and if that is a thing, because it may well come back null, it may not come back with anything, but if it is a thing, then I'm going to, I'm going to take that form and just submit it. So we've got an input object. I'm going to take the input value. Oops, this is auto-submitting it, right? So I'm going to take the input. There's a OTP as an object. It has a code property, which is that 6-digit or however many digit thing that arrived in the HTML, and then form.submit. We're just going to move things on straight away. I think that's all we need. So if I just bring up the device here, I am logged in right now. I'll log out. That's concerning. Who's gone off the internet? Is it my phone or is it my computer? Let's restart the Wi-Fi. Let's make sure ngrok is still running. Let's stop ngrok. Cool. Let's start that again just to make sure that was not the problem. I haven't stopped the application. That's back on the internet. Let's reload. Cool, I think we're back. Yes, right, lovely. We're logged out. But you can't see it. There we go. So, first thing, I click login, and we get our instant log in, sign in with one click. I would like to sign in as this person, please. Thank you very much. That's going to move on to the next stage. That's going to give me the two-factor authentication code, which has sent the thing, and we get the text message in. But this is the bit that I like. This is the bit that says, Chrome would like to read this out of your message. And you press allow, that puts it into the form. Then it does the auto-submit, as I just built. And so that was a 2-click login with a username and password and two-factor authentication over SMS. I'm excited about that. Thank you. Even better, like I said before, if you're very much built into the Safari and iOS ecosystem, then you can get that to work on the desktop. And I'm told, I, on my Mac, use Firefox as my main browser, and I use iOS as my main device. And so I tried to set this up, but it didn't ever work for me in order to get a recording of it. But if you are signed in with your Google Chrome across your Android and your desktop applications, supposedly this should work in that as well. I have to caveat it with supposedly. I haven't managed to do it myself, but it's not my ecosystem. But this could really work if, and this could be a surprise, a lovely experience for somebody receiving that text message on their device, but logging in via Chrome as well. And it only takes kind of this much code to say, hey, I just want those credentials, and to make sure that the SMS is sent with that bottom line with the domain and the code in it. So yeah, that's how it works. That's how it works on the device. Like I said, the entire thing moves so quickly in this particular case because I was recording. I didn't think about it. I just pressed it. It's that quick to log in. Now, I wanted to allow you to try this yourself. You can see this on your own devices if you want to. So if you did want to open up, if you wanted to open up your device and test this out yourself, you can grab your phone, hit up HTTPS. And the HTTPS is important, I should mention this. The credential management APIs do not work on just an HTTP site, but no one's doing just HTTP anymore, right? Cool. So hit https://philnash.ngrok.io. I would actually go for the, if you go via the verify your phone number thing, because you don't have an account in my fake system, but if you go via the verify your phone number thing, that just allows you to put your phone number in and then fill in a verification code with the exact same experience that if you get the text message, you can just autofill it, and it is good. So that is there. We can test that out anytime over the next, whilst my computer's on. Because that is all running on my device right now. I should probably deploy this somewhere, but we'll see. I do want to bring up the feature, and I kind of mentioned that extensibility earlier. You see, this API for WebOTP here says the transports can be SMS, but that is an array. And so I haven't really mentioned through this the idea of using an authenticator app, which is more secure, and in fact is actually what I'm mostly invested in using throughout my accounts. But so this transport thing exists as an array because I hope that there are people working towards the idea of making an app a viable way to extract the code from somehow and provide it to the browser. That, of course, requires operating systems and browsers all to talk nicely to each other, as well as then authenticator app creators, and all to build on this API and get it out there. It doesn't exist right now, but that is a hope for the future and something that we can always kind of lobby and ask for. And I'd like to see it. I think that would make the experience of logging in with an authenticator app a lot nicer. There are, of course, finally, ways to use authentication APIs. I'm not here to plug Twilio, but one of them is that to kind of do a push notification-based verification, such that a user receives a push and inside an app says yes, and then comes back to find themselves fully logged in. That's a good experience too. It takes a lot more effort than just kind of these lines of code or the autocomplete attribute on the input. I understand. I would like to see this just be a nicer experience for everybody, not just for the people who have the time to build a complicated application and web application experience. Anyway, all of this is to say that login is a bit of an experience that exists with a whole bunch of friction right now that we can enhance and make better for people. We can make it quicker, and we can get users from not doing what they wanted to doing what they wanted to do quicker. I talk about this as an enhancement because these are APIs that are only available on certain platforms. It's not a lot of code, and we do need to kind of feature detect for that, and then progressively enhance our applications in order to make this better for those who have the browsers and the capabilities to experience that. But it doesn't take a lot. And so I recommend enhancing the experience like this, making your users' login lives a lot easier. So that's all I've got for you this morning. As I said, my name is Phil Nash. I'm a developer evangelist at Twilio. You can find me out there at the Twilio stand for the rest of the time. But also, I believe we have probably 9 minutes for questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me this morning. How do we have any questions at all? I also noticed there's like a microphone at the back. I don't know if that's for the questions, or you can probably just wave a hand at me and shout. That's also fine. And if you don't, we can all beat the other rooms to getting coffee next. No questions. All right, brilliant. In that case, just come by, see me at the Twilio stand. I've got some stuff today. I think I have more swag turning up tomorrow, so come and get it then as well, and come and say hi. But otherwise, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the NDC.